He's worked as an independent photojournalist and documentary photographer since 1994. He has concentrated on the exploration of countries and peoples immersed in cycles of violence across the globe. Assignments and personal projects have taken him to El Salvador, Colombia, Iraq, and Afghanistan, and his current work centers around the U.S.-Mexican border issues, particularly the effects and causes of organized crime in Mexico and throughout Latin America. Our second guest is Joshua Willow Hooper, is down there. He's a freelance producer and director of photography based here in San Francisco. He produced segments for the HBO documentary Witness, following war and conflict photographers in Brazil, Central Africa, African Republic, Libya, and South Sudan, and Uganda. And this film is one of 4 films that have been shown on HBO in the last couple of months. And our third guest is David Frankham, who is an award-winning commercial and documentary director. In 2010, he produced and directed the documentary film Witness Juarez, and that was the first one. And also Eris is in that film. And the film follows conflict photographer Eris Hoagland as he covers the brutal drug war raging between Mexico and the cartels. And Witness Juarez went on to be shortlisted for the 2011 Academy Awards and was acquired by HBO as the pilot that then became this series of documentary films called Witness. The series was born out of David's belief that by following the experiences and struggles of war photographers who risked their lives in an attempt to reveal the truth, we would capture an honest, ground-level view of the conflicts around the world and the people affected in a way that have not been seen before. And I also wanted to honor John Hoagland, who is Eris's dad. And Eris's father was a war photographer of my generation, and a photojournalist noted for his documentation of conflicts in Nicaragua, Lebanon, and El Salvador. He photographed the Sandinista Revolution in Nicaragua, after which he moved to El Salvador in '79, and he also photographed in Beirut. And in March 1984, John was gunned down while photographing a pair of Salvadoran soldiers taking photographs for Newsweek magazine, and he died doing remarkable and incredibly important war photography. So I just wanted to mention that, and we should not forget John's memory as a photographer. No matter what lies writers may tell themselves, very often it's the pictures that truly bring us the story, particularly in war zones and strife-torn areas where there are brutalities you have to see to believe. And I think we've seen some of those brutalities this evening in this film. But war is troubling. Reporting on war is equally troubling. Is there any sane way to report on insanity? As one of the greatest war photographers, Robert Capa, said, "War is like an aging actress, more and more dangerous and less photogenic." Capa knew what he spoke of. He covered 5 different wars: the Spanish Civil War, the Second Sino-Japanese War, World War II across Europe, the 1948 Arab-Israeli War, and the First Indochina War, where he was killed in 1954, stepping on a landmine, shooting for time life. Capa was a self-styled himself into the model that became the dashing war photojournalist that so many have followed. He was a lot like the photographers in this series, serious about covering important conflicts, but not afraid of being a public figure. But Capa wasn't in the story, which raises some questions for me about this series. As we know, the media pays for and publishes what sells: celebrity nonsense, images of horror. Often photographers make their careers based on a single image of horror or violence that articulates any given event. So that means all of us at home are complacent in sending these men and women into danger. And yet most of the public are so media saturated that we are not aspired to do much of anything. We are entertained by the horror, the shock of it, but very few of us do anything to stop the violence. In an odd way, the horror of war and Lindsay Lohan and Snooki's latest antics are just one giant media blur. And really, what is there to do? So before we open this conversation to the audience, I personally have a few questions that I hope we can talk about. and then we'd love to open the conversation up to you guys. So Eris, powerful to watch this, hard to watch it. And I mean, I see your passion about telling the powerful story of Rio, the human rights violations, the gangs, the struggle for survival, of course, the lack of media attention to the story. But one of my worries is you as this romantic figure dashing across the screen and strung with the cameras like so many bandoliers, as one media writer, I think it was the Los Angeles Times described it, putting yourself in harm's way to get the shot that will explain better, perhaps more than words ever could, the impact of war and the conflict that raises some of the questions that I think are so important to ask. So I have a couple questions. I know you believe that the pictures you take have consequences. What was your consideration in being in the center of the story? Was it the horror of the conflict or the artistry of capturing the horror? Did you, and I'll put a few questions and you know, take what you'd like. Did you ever worry that this film might encourage young photographers to try and make a name for themselves, following in your footsteps, not understanding the human cost that accompanies such reportage? And the last one, what did happen to the fixer who paved the way for you to enter these dangerous situations?
Well, I'll start with the fixer.
Yeah.
As you can see from the film, we were very, very concerned and cautious about everything we did with him. But he's great. He's fine.
And the preacher?
The preacher, we have no idea. I mean, as you might have noticed, he's already a little off his rocker. We might have rushed in a little bit with him. Mm-hmm. It was very difficult to understand exactly what he was doing and where he was going. I mean, he would literally just show up at this place and, oh, here we are, and we didn't understand where we were about to go, and we're out in the field with these guys that are packaging cocaine, doing cocaine, and ranting and raving. And that was a bit odd. And in those situations, I can only just say, hey, he knows what we're doing. He's made the decision to take us out there. In Fixer's case, we're asking him to take us out there. We're paying him to take us out there. It becomes a little bit more of a tenuous relationship. But we followed all the rules that we needed to with him and his contacts in the community. And he's doing well. He's doing real well. In fact, that was not his last fixing job in a violent situation. I know that he's still working. But it really concerns me a lot that so many fixers are not treated with enough caution. I mean, several have been killed that I know of just recently that have been used by photographers that I know, and that's absurd. It's inexcusable. So yeah, I'm really concerned with that. I'm really concerned with that, and I'm becoming more and more concerned with the people I photograph as well. Over the past couple of years, I mean, that Kappa quote was right on, because these wars it's just getting harder and harder, and I think the internet has a lot to do with that. You can't just say, hey, I work for a magazine in Canada, you know, it'll never be seen around here. No, everything is up and circulated instantly, and everybody knows it. It's very difficult, and sometimes I just feel like, am I putting, you know, you photograph young gang members, for example. And I know this is the case over and over in Juarez and Tijuana. These young gang members would be posing, you know, with all their guns and everything. And I'm like, you know, they don't know that their bosses are probably going to kill them next week. And the photographers aren't even thinking about this. And for what end? You know, how much does that picture mean? And it's really got me rethinking everything I photograph these days. And unfortunately, it's made me a little gun shy as well, so to speak. I mean, I'm like, I don't rush out there and just start snapping away anymore. It kind of freaks me out.
And do you worry about younger photographers watching this HBO piece and thinking, wow, I want to be like Eris Hoagland?
It doesn't worry me.
I mean,
it's a fact.
You've probably bumped into some of them
it's a fact.
who don't know anything.
I've gotten emails from lots of young photographers. They want to come out in the field with me. They want to, you know, follow me around and all this. And everyone's going to make their own decisions. I can't begin to feel responsible just because I portray part of the caricature that we portray as ourselves. I mean, we are indeed in a way, caricatures of ourselves. I mean, this whole idea of the strapping kind of, you know, cameras hanging around and romantic, I mean, that's partially true. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that it's not romantic, that it's not sexy, because that is part of the whole deal. In fact, it has many other sides that differ from that distinctly, but that's part of it.
Okay.
And just quickly, as for being the subject matter,
Yeah.
it was a whole different trip for me. But
You're on the other side of the
yeah,
camera
we were
always.
filming so much that it really did just disappear. And the guy that was filming me is a good friend of mine and also a trained, he's a still photographer. And after a while, it just disappeared. But the way I kind of finally, I don't want to say justified it, but what made me more comfortable with it is like, look, I go around the world taking pictures of other people doing interesting things. David wants to come in and make a film about me, who he sees interesting, doing my thing. So I don't really see the difference. Why shouldn't I be game as well as anybody else, I guess?
Yeah, and I think to add to that, when I first approached Eros, you know, it was an idea that I had been thinking about for a long time, out of my own curiosity. I'm not a journalist by trade. You know, I came up doing narrative films, and I was but a news junkie, and I wanted to know how these images were captured. I wanted to know, you know, I think so many people think that they happen in front of these photographers. And I wanted to know the journey and the struggle and what it took to get these images. And when I first approached Eros, you know, we talked about that a lot, and we talked about what we didn't want it to be a lot. And you know, how it could get very sensationalizing. It could go into a lot of different areas. But I think the deal that I was asking him to make was, you know, would you put yourself up as this character that we can follow into these conflicts, so that we can see this other side of journalism that I hadn't personally really seen before, and also in a Trojan horse way, allow us to get into a conflict zone so we could relate to the people on the ground and what they're going through, and the struggles on the ground, so that we, you know, there might be someone who says, like, I'm not going to watch a documentary on Rio. I don't have really any interest on it. But they might have an interest in seeing what a journalist does or a war photographer does, and hopefully by the end we'll be connected to the people on the ground and the struggle there, and take something away from that. So I think it was definitely not set up as a glamour deal or anything like that to begin with, you know what I mean, in that situation, or a portrayal in that way. It was really a way into to an experience that I hope that we could portray honestly.
And I know earlier David Fanning talked about, you know, shooting hours and hours and hours of film, particularly the you know, alligator hunters and the hillbilly duck guys and all that stuff. So how heavy-handed did you have to get? Was there a lot of kind of MTVing the doc to juice it up for television? I mean,
you know,
listen, I mean, we're
there's
seeing
a lot
what
of,
we're seeing,
we can
but
see, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of editing that went on within this. I think at the same time, you know, we talked a lot about it throughout the editing process and tried to stay as true to what happened to us on the ground. And, you know, I mean, we took that title of witness seriously, that we were trying to give the most honest ground level portrayal that we could of this 30 days we spent on the ground. And we shot 30 days in 30 days, and it was a battle, and it was a struggle, and I know it was a very tough journey for Eros in particular, where we were coming up against, you know, before we got there, there was a lot of open fighting in the streets. There was something that had changed with the pre-announcement when we got there, and a very strong, I would say, PR movement that was in place, and we were kind of kept outside of what was going on. We kept hearing about it, and I think that journey that is portrayed like that, you know, throughout the film is true to what happened. The bodies that we came across at the end were in the final 2-3 days, and it was you know, there's a lot of editing going on. There's editing every time you take a photograph, what you're leaving in, what you're taking out. When you're putting two images together, there's definitely, you know, manipulation in storytelling. But I think that this, you know, I feel like it's a very true representation of our 30 days in Rio.
Yeah, definitely.
And
It was
Joshua,
incredibly stressful.
what's been the reaction of this on HBO? What feedback have you gotten?
I mean, it's all been positive feedback. HBO, not as many people saw it, I think. I almost wonder if more people watch PBS than HBO. But the reaction's been great. I mean, it's been well reviewed. Everyone liked it. You know, the thing about Duck Dynasty and these reality shows is, you know, these days they don't shoot hours and hours, right? They've got those down to a science that they can crank out 3 or 4 episodes in a week and a half. And this, and the only formula we went in with really was that we were going to be open to going where the story took us. And so that's what David's talking about. When we got there, you know, going in, in the past, we'd seen people getting very easy access to trafficking groups. And so we figured that it wouldn't be too much of a struggle. But what we found when we got there was a lot of, you know, it was quiet. People weren't talking. And so we wanted to figure out how to tell that story when it's quiet, when nothing is seemingly happening. And so we started just looking. We had a lot of help from a J School grad, Daniela Breitman, and then other journalists on the ground. And we just started looking at the simple things, and Marcelo Freixo, the congressman, you know, we were pointed in the obvious direction, which is this idea that homicide rate is going down, and it didn't take much to look at that. And when we were faced with this simple idea of, well, the bodies are being disappeared, how can we tell that story? We worked on trying to find a military police officer or some police officer who could just kind of confirm that and talk to us about that. And then getting in with these, the firefighter in the film actually drives this kind of ambulance or hearse almost, that they go and gather the bodies at the scenes of these homicides. And then through them hooked up with this homicide division, which really was kind of, in a way, new reporting almost that wasn't coming up in there are a couple other films were made by Al Jazeera and places, and that these guys were actually trying to hold the police accountable, you know. And so that's kind of where it took us, and it took us the entire 30 days to get there. And we used more than just the fixer we had there. Besides Daniela, we were going through, you know, we talked to the photojournalists, 3 or 4 of them, journalists, everyone just helping us kind of get to a point where we could come away with something that wasn't just, you know, the worry is that you go down into any conflict, I think, is you just end up following Eros, and he keeps arriving somewhere or chasing people with guns running around, and that you have no story, that you just kind of have followed the chaos that you know, that you see and make no sense of it. And that was a lot of work, and to come away with it, was the last 3 or 4 days that the homicide folks kind of, you know, took Eros in and allowed him to go along after the 3rd night, I think, of staying up all night with him, and really get to a story that we could feel like we had come and tried to make sense of something and come away with.
Let me ask a silly question. Does HBO make you get model releases?
No.
Make you
Model releases. Do you go up to the priest and say, will you sign this so we can air it? So the major figures
Oh, is that what you guys are
actually
doing?
sign
late at
releases.
night? There's a lot of
yeah.
Yeah, so there's a
no,
lot of
we have to
behind the
release.
scenes stuff that HBO
We have to
expects.
release people after,
Yeah, just curious.
Yeah.
Actually, the most
Eros is like, what? Model releases?
Yeah.
Did you sign one?
the thing with
Eros?
Yeah, the thing with HBO, and this was actually not for the Rio episode, but before we left to go to South Sudan and the Central African Republic, was giving us a 600-page book of people who we were not allowed to talk to, that we would be, you know, could be prosecuted in the United States for even talking to, and especially paying. They were like, "You're not going to pay anybody for interviews," and I had to assure them we wouldn't. And they said, because you could go to prison for a long time, and HBO won't defend you. It was like 600
pages. Can you give that book to Lowell? That sounds like a good story, Lowell. Like front page of the New York Times.
Exactly.
What is it called?
Foreign, yeah,
okay.
and a lot of otherwise known as, like it was tough. I think just to go back to that earlier thought, and something that David said about films being built in the edit now, which is very true. I think, and the director's role in that, but also I think in this film it was different as well because, it's very. I have a belief about how much you can steer a documentary anyways. But in this case, since Eros was the subject, and for me, it was really just reassuring him every day, like you drive it. It's yours. We would try and find as much information and as much pieces of, story that we could going on, but it was really always about letting him, it wasn't that something that we were trying to contrive. It was him driving it with his instincts and where he thought the story was going and where he thought the images, were that could tell that story. So I think it almost had another removal for the director. A lot of times I was along for the ride. A lot of times I was.
Great. Audience, questions? I think there's microphones somewhere. Yeah. I think there's one in the back. I don't think it's on. The mic's not on.
Testing.
There you
All
go.
right. I wanted to ask if you can talk about how you decide to end this particular series and the use of the photographs of people that had been burned. And then particularly for HBO, if there is a particular type of style that the documentary has to have for their broadcast, is there any kind of, and also how the photographer felt about the use of those images and where they were used and how and what your process was about that decision.
Well, as far as the style for HBO, this was the first documentary series that I know of that wasn't created in New York, and with Sheila, and we created it with Michael Mann, of course, and we did it all in Los Angeles. So it was Michael Mann, Michael Lombardo, and it was a very small loop, kind of. So it didn't have to kind of live within a style of or a language of other HBO films. I think we felt they gave us free reign as far as that, and all of their notes were kind of to content and to just into clarity and not to anything stylized. So as far as the first question about the bodies at the end and the choice of including them. Yeah, I mean, in a way, like I was saying, that it was part of this linear journey that there was this feeling of we were being held back from from witnessing the deaths that were going on. There was a lot of like it mentioned 32,000. I can't remember what it is now exactly, but bodies that had disappeared in Rio. And we had felt like we were up against that. We weren't seeing this violence that we were hearing about, and that it was very difficult to show that. It's very difficult for me to see it now, but I think that we wouldn't have done that conflict justice without showing the victims at the end. And then
Question in the back. Right over here. No, right in front of you. Turn around. Turn around. Yeah, right there.
Hi, I just have two questions. The film didn't really have a conclusion. I'm wondering, first of all, do you feel like do you feel finished? Did you feel finished there once you saw these bodies? Did you feel like you had answers? The other question I have is that you talked about this source, you had this still of this source, and you said, why should they talk to us? We're not changing, what's the use? And I'm wondering, especially for Eros, why do you do this? If you don't feel like you're making a change, why do you do it?
You know, I've thought about this long, long and hard, and I'm making a change in myself. Because if I can't look at myself and change myself, there's no way in hell I'm going to even attempt to change anything else. And I think it's really become just part of my journey, part of my way of understanding the world and making my way through it. I really have high doubts about how much these pictures really change the lives of the people affected immediately in them. But that doesn't mean that, you know, we can't try, I suppose. As far as conclusion, nothing I ever done is concluded. It all rolls on. It all continues to happen. I mean, every conflict I've ever seen photographed, it keeps going, it keeps going, it keeps going, it keeps going, it doesn't end. It never ends. Like any of them, they've never ended. They've morphed into something else and they keep going.
I also,
I would just say this comes up a lot, I think, for conflict photographers. You know, there's a perception that people are adrenaline junkies or just out to, you know, yeah, basically in it for a kind of rush or some other, you know, fetish or something. And I think it's really kind of unfair. As a news photographer, Eros is out to cover news, and he happens to go to conflict areas. And I think, you know, I think he's become more aware after the show of how much it can change people's lives. But he's also kind of aware that overall he doesn't get any feeling like, you know, that's not driving him. This kind of idea that he's out to change the world or doing anything other than to try and just cover and report on what he sees when he goes into these areas. So that's...
yeah, and on the note about the conclusion of the film, I mean, it is very open-ended in a lot of ways, and we, after 30 days, we came away with more questions than answers. And I think that was something that's kind of a through line in the series. Like, it wasn't about, like, summation. It wasn't about, like, I'm going to simplify this, and this is the whole story, and here it is. Like, these conflicts, if we stayed another 30 days, or if we came 30 days later, we would have witnessed something else. And so it really was trying to just represent, this is Eros's journey, this is what we saw. And yeah, none of them are clean endings, but I think to try and wrap it up in a clean ending would have really to have contrived something and to simplify something that is much more complex than that, especially well, all of them.
Yeah.
And I think also just Eros's sentiment in that moment is that he's become very aware of what people are willing to do to convince subjects to go on camera, and that he's not willing to kind of try and tell anyone anymore that this is in your interest or anything other than I want to do it. I think it's important that he's no longer under
right. Or just I'm just plain interested, and that brings me to another thing, because that alone sometimes is worth more than anything. When you go into super marginalized areas and you're giving attention and curiosity and genuine warmth and fascination to a person who otherwise just gets brushed along every inch of their life, like, this weird foreign guy's here and he's really fascinated with me. He wants to take pictures. He wants to hang out with me every day, and that alone I think is worth a lot. So there's that.
Great, we have a question right there. Yeah.
Hi. I filmed in one of those favelas about 4 or 5 years ago, and it all came rushing back. It was an incredibly violent place, and it was a very good portrait of it. And the number of disappeared people you talked about at the end was very powerful. I had no idea that was going on. Here's my question. When I got there, about a day before I got there, a couple of cops had been wasted in the main street just where it joined up with the favela. And everybody knew what was going to happen next. There weren't going to be detectives trying to find out who did it. There was going to be a punitive raid. They were going to attack the favela and kill people. And what people told me, all the conversation I had with people, all saying, Bill, here's where you should lie when the police come. My question to you, and there's no implied criticism, but a genuine question. If you'd done this story from the other point of view, from the point of view of the people of the community being attacked by the paramilitary police, what would be the, I can see filming from the police, you're getting foreground interest, a reasonable guarantee of action, a little margin of safety, I'd imagine. If you did it from the other point of view, what would be the aesthetic, moral, practical difficulties?
Man, I wish I knew, because we spent most of the first 3 weeks trying to do that. And there was a directive, must have been from the higher ups in the criminal organizations. They're just like, nope, don't deal with them, don't talk to them. Well, they talked to us, but not on camera. I mean, that was the first 3 weeks, literally, and I was ready to quit, man. I was just like, we got no access. We've got no access. But it was the very reality that no one was talking that made me realize that it was the right time to be there. So it was like, what's going on here? There's something going on here. But man, I wish I could have seen it. I really wish I could have seen that. But the truth is, we didn't see it from the police either. I mean, they were dogging us at every minute. There was a few, that one scene where, we're kind of in that gunfight in the railroad tracks. That was like one of 2 times I think we actually went out with them on a semi-legitimate operation. Everything else was dog and pony show, and we're getting stonewalled at every corner.
Yeah, and it was people were very afraid at this time. When we talked about how the rules had changed, and people felt it. People did not want to speak. It went overnight from the open gun battles in the streets to this pre-announcement, the traffickers leaving, and nobody knowing like who really controlled the favelas. So they didn't want to talk on the behalf of the pacification, the police, and say, oh, this is better. They didn't want to talk on the side of like, well, we were fine when the traffickers were here. This community was okay. Like no one knew where it was going to land, so no one wanted to speak. And yeah, it's a difficult and a very, I mean, it's fascinating to me today because it's still going on. They say there's numbers as high as 2 million people being displaced. Out to Cosmos and out to these areas outside. And when you see the buildings, being half broken, being torn down just halfway, so you couldn't live in them, sewage pipes being broken so that the rats and the snakes and what have you would come in, and just forcing people out in that way. It is a, I don't know.
It's very, very poignant. The people spend years and years building those houses. They take huge pride in them.
Yeah.
And there's quite a lot of creativity in the way they build them. So when you saw the house being demolished, it was really poignant.
Yeah, I mean, some of like Hosini is like this vibrant, beautiful community, and people have been there for generations. It's not, we talk about it as a slum, but it's so much more than that. It has so much culture and families that have been there forever. And so when you see some of the displacement, yeah, it's heartbreaking. And in the name of, building a parking lot for the Olympics or for the World Cup or whatever,
Let's take one more question, I think, back there.
I also have a question.
Okay.
I just want to say thank you for bringing it, obviously, to the viewers, because a lot of people don't get to travel. And so it's like awesome to be able to be there with you and at the same time sad, but realizing that it's not just happening in our backyard, it's happening everywhere and it's even worse. So we're really blessed. But my question is, have you ever considered following this 10 years from now, 20 years from now, and going back to the pastor, the priest, and following, see what happens from all this experience? Because it's one thing doing it and then be like, okay, whatever. It's just an experience, it's a film, but going back 10 years, 20 years from now, and how would you guys consider doing that?
I haven't thought of it yet, but I mean, it would be very fascinating because a lot of the people in Rio were like saying, hey, this is all after the Olympics are over, this is just gonna go back to how it was before. I don't know if that's going to happen or not. I mean, there's going to be a lot of money poured into a lot of people's pockets, so.
Yeah, I mean, it's something I would love to go back to all the places that we filmed throughout the series. I mean, and there is, you know, we're constantly in touch with people there, and you know, it would be a matter of funding and a matter of figuring it out. You know, I think again, I kind of naively thought as well that the story would spark other people following that, you know, these people in those stories, and I haven't seen a lot of that, you know, but. Yeah, yeah, no, yeah.
I think it's going to take a while for us to be able to get visas to go back,
yeah,
personally.
Don't think we're going to Korea.
Right in the back, yeah.
Okay, the only thing I don't understand is the role of the favela resident. She was a female woman, and there are several cutaways of her sandals that were red. Can you explain that?
We don't exactly know.
Was she a prostitute?
No. She was.
She had some. Like she was.
She had some affiliation with the mafia in the area, but I was wondering that again as I was watching her. I was like, who was that woman? But she, you know, one thing I do know about her, she was really angry, and I was really surprised when she was insisting on being filmed, because I'm like, you're telling us shit. You know, it just blew my mind. Do you know something more about her? Because
yeah, I mean, she had connection to. She was a kind of a community leader. Had connection to some of the groups that ran the favela before the pacification came into that favela. She was definitely angry because she was seeing both sides taking place around her. You know, again, like talking about the trafficker dressed as the police, and I don't know. Yeah, she was one of the few kind of brave voices. Again, it was difficult for people to speak out, and she wanted to speak out and wanted to talk about, you know, the change and whether the change was real, you know.
I think this relates to the earlier question about the impression overall of the film is that it's from the police's perspective, or that, you know, we could have filmed it from the other side, which, you know, Eros stayed, our fixer lived in the favelas, and Eros stayed with them for 3 days at a time. So it was very much from that perspective, and she was very much a member of, you know, someone who lived in the favelas. So that's, her role was to explain what she'd seen, that the one rival, you know, one faction would take over a favela violently, and the police would come back with the leader of the prior faction and help them take it back. And just to fill in that she knew that this was a temporary thing. So it was just someone on the ground who lived in the favelas giving us testimony about what they were seeing every day during the pacification process.
What about
The sandals,
I think that we were filming her with the idea that we might not show her face.
Yeah, there was a point where she didn't want to, where we were worried that she was revealing too much to speak on camera.
When we went to meet her, it was super weird, super cloak and dagger. You know, they told us, the people that set us up with her, they're like, dress in shorts and sandals, look like tourists, all this kind of thing. It was very bizarre.
That's exactly what it was. And by the end of the interview, she said, fine, you can show my face. So towards the end, you can see her on camera.
And then became, even kind of adamant about that. And I think, like, to reiterate, like, how closed the community was and how few people wanted to speak. Fresho, who spoke out, the congressman, not long within, I think, a few weeks after we finished filming there, he had to leave to Europe with his family after, I think it was his 5th or 6th attempt on his life. So it was, because he spoke so openly about the militias, about what was going on, but that's so uncommon there at this point. And
yeah. No.
Okay. I like a little more reflection in the process of the documentary, and so maybe that's old-fashioned of me, but what you've revealed in the conversation
I think would have been very beneficial in the documentary itself. Maybe that's not what the point of the documentary was, but I feel the effect, the overall effect is kind of one of general confusion, which of course it seemed like you were experiencing, and then sort of a lack of clarification, maybe you didn't have it, of who the forces are and what their possible relationships could be. Because I imagine you found something out, but maybe you couldn't say it there on the ground. But could you not say it afterwards? Could you not give us a little bit, just, you know, draw the camera back a little bit so we, the viewers who aren't going to be there in the favelas, get another sense of what's going on, of what the forces are that are at play. And because, you know, the Olympics is going to happen, the World Cup is going to happen, where eyes are going to be on Rio. So this is kind of this is a precursor, and it seems like it could serve that the role of informing us as well as giving us a really on the ground picture of what it's like to be in that situation. But I appreciate the work that you did too. But I feel like I learned a lot more more reflective work, that, you know, from what you've said right now. Anyway.
Well, let's thank our guests for coming tonight.